Right, welcome everyone to our talk on how we look to automate siloed environments. My name is Ken Hitchcock. My co-presenters with me today are Dan Hawker and Chris Renwick.
Everyone.
Chris will be the man brave enough to run our live demos for us.
Bad times.
The reason we came up with the idea for this talk was myself, Dan, Chris, we work in services in the UK, and we often work with customers looking to automate end-to-end solutions. And a lot of the times there are a few different things that prevent the end-to-end automation, as I'm sure a few of you are fully aware and may have experienced it yourself. They could involve things often like needing to automate across silos or having different teams running their own automation or restricting what you have access to. A network team doesn't want you to touch their network switches, or VMware team won't give you credentials to build a virtual machine. We all know the story. There are other reasons too that prevent the end-to-end automation.
Yeah, and it's not that like we've got here. It's not that we don't want to speak to each other. Sometimes it's just more complicated or more difficult than it ought to be. So sometimes, I don't know, the Ansible team are based out of somewhere in the US, but then your database team are, I don't know, in APAC somewhere, and you're somewhere. I mean, it depends on the thing, and again, simple time zones, simple things like that are actually getting in the way.
Exactly.
And then there's loads of other reasons as well. You don't know who to find. So, I mean, I've been in many environments where who is the person that looks after DNS? I mean, God, that's mind-bending. And so, you have to really kind of work out some of those things out, and that really hampers how you can work within all these different teams.
Yeah, I've had a lot of experiences in the past with having to go and talk to different people, get them to do things for you. I used to keep a bag of chocolates on my desk to go and give people chocolates with a Post-it note to do stuff for me. So we don't often talk to each other when we need to. One of the other things that tends to limit people with end-to-end automation is they may fear the fact that because they're automating, they're potentially limiting their job opportunities or job security going forward, which isn't always the case.
100%, mate. It's not always that they're worried about that kind of thing either. Sometimes it's just naturally, I'm the expert in whatever that happens to be, that field. So whether that's networking or, Kubernetes or whatever, you don't want to give away almost that responsibility that you've taken years and years to do, and you know that environment and that kind of section really, really, really well. It's not, how do you give away or kind of let other people access that, but at the same time, don't ruin it, don't make a mess of it. But how can they use it without it being?
Yeah, you don't want to get rid of that level of
expertise.
Exactly, you just want to help automate. That's all. I mean, these particular automations people work on today, they're using current tooling available for a while, which is satellite for building physical systems or virtual machines, Ansible Automation Platform for building out the configuration, or any other configuration tooling you like. I mean, some people even, smart enough to go and use the API from AAP.
Yeah, and we've all got, and again, they've all got different tooling, different things. You'll have some guys in different parts of the organisation using Terraform, different parts of the organisation using something else. It's that hodgepodge of how do you, again, they spent a lot of time and effort doing their automation and getting it right, and how do you then give it away and in a way that's consumable by everybody else?
Yeah, exactly. Can you speak up just a little? Yeah, you're a bit far away from it.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, so everyone's got their own tooling and stuff they like to use, whichever way they've done it, developed it in the past, their own way of writing Ansible, maybe even with dreaded shell. So going forward with automation and working with different teams and silos, we can change some of the tooling a little bit. And we've had some of the exposure to what that is already with the keynotes that we've had using, Ansible, event-driven Ansible.
Yeah. We've got, and again, this is sort of providing that bridge into some of our more, some of the other ways that people do automation, but also just generally use applications and platforms nowadays. So again, lots and lots of Git, lots and lots of GitOps, and again, similarly with OpenShift and AMQ and streams and Kafka and stuff, it's very much more of an event-driven kind of model, and hence how you integrate that with your existing set of automation that, again, like you said, you've lovingly cared for and created and done all that stuff for. This is where EDA kind of bridges that gap, starts to allow you to sort of join the dots that previously were quite separated and siloed.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit strange to talk about AMQ with automation, isn't it? So to get our head around what that potentially looks like, Chris, you've got something that you can show us that can help everyone sort of maybe understand how EDA and AMQ can work together?
Yeah, so we're going to be running through multiple demos today. They're all going to be based in OpenShift just because, well, it was quite easy to bring everything to life really in OpenShift. So if we just scroll to the next slide here, this is demo one. So demo one's going to be, well, as you can see, very simple. And we're going to iteratively, so demo 1, 2, and 3, we're going to essentially bring more and more complexity into it. So for demo 1, it's going to be myself essentially pushing a message using Kafka UI. The Kafka message broker will pick that message up, post it, and then we'll have event-driven Ansible living in a different namespace in OpenShift. Essentially running event-driven Ansible and listening on that Kafka broker. So it's just going to be listening for various messages that I'm going to be sending in there.
So it's a bit strange having everything on OpenShift, Chris. You know, it's having an automation platform and EDA and messaging all in one place on OpenShift. It's not our general AAP.
Yep. So if we jump to the next slide there, so we can just see that in action.
Yeah, give us an example.
So something that we should remember as well here. So the premise of event-driven Ansible is that it's reactive to events, obviously, and there's three things that we should kind of take away from this talk, and it's sources, conditions, and actions. So we do have multiple sources in event-driven Ansible. I know it's brand new; it's just GA this week, really. So sources include webhooks, Kafka, file changes, various alert managers in the various public cloud platforms. We also have the community constantly building new plugins for the sources as well. Then we have the conditions. So essentially, if anybody's wrote an Ansible playbook, it's very similar to how we write conditions in normal playbooks. And then we have the actions. So essentially, the response to the condition. So if this, then do this. If something else, respond differently. So we can see this in action here. So we've got a rule that essentially it's going to be listening on the payload. So it's going to be listening on a message that's coming through into Kafka, and it's going to check that the string that is being passed contains Ken. So if I were to produce a message here.
So Chris, this is the Kafka UI environment you're using.
Yep. So just on the diagram that we've just seen there, this is just Kafka UI. So if we do a test, then if we have
creating a message in Kafka UI.
Simple bit of JSON there.
No, I'm Ken.
And we should see something respond. So if we produce that message,
yep.
so you can see that we get a response from event-driven Ansible. And what we'll do is...
And so I was going to say that I'm feeling a bit left out. Okay.
Yeah, you're only saying hello to me, yeah.
So what we can do is we can just add a new rule so that Dan doesn't feel so left out here. Let's have a look. And it's as simple as this. We'll just swap these around. So we're going to say hello to Dan this time.
Chris, I noticed you've changed the name of that rule. I don't normally do that when I do if I'm doing it properly. But I don't have to do that in a normal playbook in Ansible.
Yeah.
Call them anything you like.
So something to really note in regards to differences to writing a normal Ansible playbook to writing a rule book is that the names do really matter. This is because you can have a rule activate and then the artifacts gathered from that rule activation can be passed to another rule. So obviously, if you've got two rules named the exact same thing, you can get some confusion there. So just make sure that you've got your rules named differently.
Nobody wants two Kens.
Well, exactly. There's enough Kens in the world.
What I'll do there is just rebuild this image.
And you're doing that because we're running this on OpenShift, correct?
Exactly right. So the event-driven Ansible instance is running in OpenShift just in a pod. The image itself is living on key.io or Quay. And what we can do is we'll just destroy this pod.
This is where the internet plays up.
Well, I'm hoping the Wi-Fi is okay.
It's been all right most of the time.
Joys of live demos. There we go. So that's back up and running now. Pretty
So
quick.
We've got a new image, brilliant.
Now if we send a new message, we can say hello to Dan. Should pick that up, and we can see we've got a hello Dan there as well. And just to prove that out, just to prove there's no kind of strange stuff going in the background and we're just faking all of this.
Yeah, no hard-coded stuff there.
I'll send another message and say hello to myself. And as you can see, there's no response from event-driven Ansible. So it's just very simple demo just to kind of get to grips with how it can work and how it can be implemented.
Okay.
We can jump back to the slides now, continue.
Yes, that's pretty good, Chris. That gives us an example of how you can use a messaging queue or topic to generate a message and then have EDA pick up on it and do what it wants. So we saw some stuff with Dynatrace where they were pulling in logs and using EDA to be able to trigger off some events or some remediation. Which brings us to some valid points. So there's some good cases for EDA we've come across, and one of them potentially is around the workflows. We just saw a very simple workflow using a message coming in, using the message to trigger off some events. It's a simple example, but I'm sure you can already see some of the larger uses of that particular flow that you could use.
100%, you can make that as complex or as simple as you really want. I mean, you can have a very, very short workflow like we just had there, or something ginormous and crazy. And again, back to what we saw yesterday at the keynote, things like self-healing and all that kind of stuff is a really, really good use case of event-driven Ansible, because you've got that real dynamic response from something going wrong, or something going right even. So, you know, if a machine goes down and everything happens, or you've got a particular alert that goes through, you can get back to the conditions and what you can do, really kind of build it up. And
Yeah,
that kind of separation's also good, isn't it, Ken?
Of course, with the cross-collaboration stuff we're hoping to get into in a few minutes around running automation across silos where people run their own environments with their own automation. Which brings us to another idea about the self-healing we spoke about. A few of us, or many of us in the audience, would have worked in an environment where we've had failures in the system or outages running at early hours of the morning or late in the evening, and you get those phone calls and you go out and log in and look what you need to do, and you find out that actually this has got nothing to do with my department, it's someone else. And sometimes there's another process to go through to go and raise another call or phone someone else, get someone else out of bed. And that whole process can drag on. I mean, I worked on call before in the past, and I'm sure yourself, Dan, has done it.
I'm sure most people here have at some stage, and we've all had that horrible time when we've been called when we don't want to be, and we're enjoying ourselves somewhere
Every time.
else. But yeah, totally. I mean, there's some real kind of that reactive kind of formula again really, really helps sort of how you can really streamline, but also adjust the flow based on the conditions around what gets alerted and what doesn't, and where, again, you can have a little bit of self-reliance on that, or self-healing at the beginning part where I know a service is offline, give it a kick, see if it comes back again. If it doesn't, then phone somebody. I mean, there's a real kind of sort of setup there where you can make that workflow a bit more kind of, rather than very linear and long like in here, in this really horrible but sensible example.
Yeah,
you can make it a bit more, properly reactive.
Yeah, and most of the time it takes a lot longer to get issues resolved with the back and forth and raising tickets and whatnot, which isn't really great for uptime unless you've got 1,000 people working on the project.
Yes.
But to fix that and to work with that, this is one of the use cases that we've been pushing with EDA, is to get EDA to handle a lot of these auto-remediation things, picking up, creating new tickets, alerting people, I mean, even triggering stuff in Slack and everything else that you can use these days.
Yeah, and that's back to that kind of bit more of the modern day way of we kind of do things. I mean, chat ops and pushing things through. If you can get EDA to see that, manage it, push it through without having to go through an awful lot of extra fluff, then that's actually really, really powerful. And again, you can, back to that routing that you can sort of dynamically do within it, based on the conditions that you set. I mean, you can make a really good sort of, you can hopefully make it much better.
100%, and it really leans into this slide, Dan, where someone has to get out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they might have automation already to remediate the issue, and they've got to log into their system and run it, where we're looking with EDA to potentially take that out of the equation a little bit and have the automated Ansible
Yeah,
automated automation.
Exactly, but it's back to that. Also, the same with that earlier use case of one team needing to talk to another team. There's sometimes all those handovers again, depending on the team, depending on what they've got on their automation. That could quite possibly be a manual step involved, or certainly a step where someone's got to have to press a big go button somewhere to initiate that second level. If you can use something like event automation to trigger that rather than have to do something based on a series of conditions, then that'd be awesome.
100%. And it reminds me of a conversation me and Chris had, was it a couple of weeks ago, Chris? We were talking about having a DevOps person request a virtual machine to be created that needed some storage. Now, Dan, in our little fictional world, we've got you as our storage administrator, and we have some restrictions, right, around our storage.
Yeah, we get this at customers quite often where they've got all the automation for like spinning up a VM, for instance, something relatively simple, but there will be areas where, for instance, they'll have all the pre-approvals in the world for a particular type and flavor and particular size, for instance. But then if you breach something, I don't know, storage size, for instance, of more than so many gigabytes.
Yeah, 25 gigs or whatever.
Yeah, something ridiculous. And then obviously the world ends and you need an approval and something else happens. And again, it's not uncommon, and you understand why. You don't want people creating multi-terabyte disks of nothingness. But it's still important to understand how you can try and...
Yeah, 100%. This lends into this situation I was chatting to Chris about. The DevOps person needed to create a virtual machine and needed 25 gigs of storage for his virtual machine. And Chris, you said you had something you could potentially show us that can simulate that process.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Ken. Right, so rolling on to demo 2. You might have to bear with me here on this one because every demo is going to get slightly more complicated. My funny accent might not be able to cope with that. Right, if we go on to the next slide here.
Sorry, Chris. There you go.
Working? Yep. So what we're going to try and demonstrate here is having a shared event-driven Ansible instance shared across the platform and storage teams silos. So platform team already has some great automation they can use as the platform team, but and the storage. So the platform team has some awesome automation that they can run themselves, but essentially they want to expose that automation so that other silos can consume that. Exactly the same way for the storage silo as well. So inside of your event-driven Ansible instance there, you can see that we've got this purple diamond underneath, and that is essentially the layer of logic, the layer of intelligence that we're going to address here. So that's our developer wants a virtual machine, and we've just got this restriction of a 20 gigabyte limit on that machine. So anything over 20 gig essentially requires an approval. So that means we need to leverage some of the storage team's automation to query AWS and just essentially check that we've got that storage capacity available, so that the storage manager can make an assessment, can make a judgment, and then approve that.
So that's interesting, Chris. So we've got EDAs going to not only trigger off the code to go and build an instance, but it's also going to speak to, will we say ServiceNow?
Yep.
Ticketing system of your choice. That's going to create an alert. It's going to create an approval request for the storage because it's gone over a certain threshold. And if we get the approval, we can carry on with the automation.
Yep, exactly right. So essentially think of it like a feedback loop. So with ServiceNow.
You got the rule book we can have a look?
Yep, if we went to the next slide. So this is a rule book that in this instance, it would be the storage team that would put this together. Well, it would be a combination of the storage and platform team sharing their automation. We'll see in future demos that we can do this different ways. But if we look at the second rule down there, we essentially check, is it the second rule? No, sorry, the first rule in the rule book. We essentially check that the payload, so the requested storage size, is greater than 20. And if it is greater than 20 gigabytes, it utilizes the storage organization's automation to query the storage and then feed that back to ServiceNow so that the storage manager, in this case, can make a decision. We've also got 2 more rules there, which essentially create the virtual machine and leverage the platform team's automation, dependent on whether they need more or less storage. And that's pretty much it for the rule book. If we jump to the next, we can see this live.
Yeah, so let's have a look, Chris. So it'd be good to see how you speak to a individual silo's automation, see how it all works.
So what we'll do here is, we've got an instance of ServiceNow open, and we will request a 25 gigabyte.
So this is the DevOps engineer
size.
logging into ServiceNow to make his request, or her request,
And
or their request.
we'll call, so we're going to create a VM on AWS here. We'll just call it Summit VM. 25 gigabyte storage size, so that will kick in an approval process. And because it's 25 gigs, it's over the 20, so it will go ahead and query AWS. So we should also see something happening in the logs here for event-driven Ansible. Let me just scroll to the bottom so we can see that.
I was going to say that was a lot of stuff, but
Yeah,
it hasn't run yet.
that's a testing.
Right.
So there we go. We can see that kicking off there, and we should also see it's actually querying that. It's querying the storage in Ansible controller. If we click inside of here, we should see something pop up. So it's actually feeding back live, and we can just hear there that Dan's got a notification. So there we go, Dan. You can make the assessment. Do you think that VM should be created?
So Dan, you got approval.
It looks great to me.
So
I'll click on the magic green button.
Are we okay to approve, Chris?
that looks fine to me to approve.
Yeah, let's approve.
There we go. We can
That's
see
storage.
event-driven Ansible kicking off again, and we can see a job in controller responding to that.
We had to speak to no one else during this phase. Everything is speaking to that silo's automation, pulling their code in, speaking to ServiceNow, pinging it live to Dan's phone for him to approve.
And again, it's leveraging different teams' automation
Yeah.
in one location without having to delegate responsibility to anyone, to, pull it back to somebody else or move anything around. This is just, a developer doing their normal thing, and EDA responding to those requests, creating all the appropriate rules, and then again, using the automation that they've already got to build out the VM and make all that other kind of stuff that's there.
Chris, how far are we?
That's done. So Summit VM has been created, and we're good to go.
Excellent. Cool.
You continue.
So that's not a bad demo. It's great, but I find that there's a little bit missing. In this particular scenario, we've got someone requested a virtual machine. It's created, storage is created. But in the real world, we've got a little bit more. What happens if we've got a developer? And I spoke to you again. This is a similar thing we spoke about, where I needed a developer to deploy an application. And they didn't want to go and speak to a security team and a database team and everyone else to go and get their little pieces done. They just want to push a button and deploy the application. Great.
Yeah.
So how do we approach that? How can we take this a little bit further, Chris?
So if we jump to the next slide here, we can see a more of a real-world example here. So cross-silo real-world example. Jump to the next slide, flowchart.
I think it's probably worth mentioning that I run the GCP team.
I was about to say, Ken,
Set the scene.
but we're trying to
Yeah,
go against multiple
context.
teams here, so how are we going to work this one in a kind of sensible way?
Chris himself is also cross-functional. He's working in both the security team and the automation team. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to be doing some approvals, Dan's going to be doing some approvals, and Chris is going to be doing some approvals across multiple silos.
And so the separation of all those kind of concerns that we have here, and you can sort of see that, well, Chris is going to explain more in a second, but there's a platform team, a GCP team, and also a security network person team.
Yeah.
Well,
So, kind of bear with us here because you're not going to be able to read any of that. I doubt it anyway. But I can kind of explain what's going on here. So, in a more real-world environment, and you want to expose your automation and you want it easily consumable for the other silos. So the best way we found to do that is to give every silo their own event-driven Ansible instance, and they can write their own rule books corresponding to that. So as I mentioned in demo 2, actually, so you've got the various organizations in controller with some fantastic pieces of automation, but only they can run it. So having this mechanism of exposing that automation to various silos just safely as well is kind of the main thing. So we've got the layer of intelligence, the rule books. So what we're going to do in this demo is run through this process. And essentially, at the end of it, we should have a full application running on a chosen virtual machine. You can see as well that we've got a GCP silo. So as you saw in demo 2, we've got the virtual machine running on AWS, but we'll have some services running in GCP. So it's a bit of a multi-cloud thing as well. Yeah, that's a big flowchart.
So yeah, Chris, it sounds pretty good. So I like the fact that we've got each silo with my GCP team, the security team, and Dan's platform team all have their own automation, their own EDA, their own listeners, all in their own locations for them to control and have access to.
Yep.
Nowhere are we giving any of the other teams access directly to any of their resources to manage. They're all being fed in via the EDA environment. Right, so Chris, you want to just quickly explain this rule book?
Yeah, so I don't want to jump into, I don't want to bore you with the technical details and essentially explain every rule book for every silo. So I've just taken a quick one here, and this one is the platform team's rule book. So they've just essentially got a few simple rules. One of them, if we look at the third rule down, the important intelligence layer. So this is essentially just going to check that the VM specification matches with the application requirements. So if we have, you'll actually see this soon, but if we have an application that requires one CPU to run, it's going to, if you can see on the condition, we've got if the VM CPU is greater than or equal to the requested CPU for the running application, it will then post that information and post a recommendation back to ServiceNow. So the platform manager can essentially make the appropriate choice. You can also fully automate this and have no approvals and just say, nope, this machine will not suit this application, and just end the whole flow there. For the purposes of this demo, it's going to meet that, and we're going to see the approvals.
So that's quite good, Chris. So our developer now has very much a similar console to what our DevOps engineer had earlier, but instead of saying, he needs a virtual machine, he's just saying, I need a location for my application. This is what I require, and pushes the button, right?
Yep. Let's see that now.
Brilliant. Let's have a look at that, Chris.
So I'll just quickly refresh these here. So what we've got here are the various instances of event-driven Ansible. So we've got the platform team, GCP team, and security team, all exposing their automation. And what I'll do is...
Yeah, so is this the database connection thing you got?
So I'll act as a developer requesting an application. So application name, that's simple enough, just test application. And we want this application to live on the virtual machine that we've just created. So I'll just refresh that to get the instance ID.
Yeah, so we've got a little Summit virtual machine we created for you.
Just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, just a few minutes ago. I mean, it's AWS, it takes a few minutes.
So there we go. The instance ID is in there. Platform is Linux fine. We can populate a few details of the requirements for this application that I've tested against. So just one CPU, one memory, one storage. My application does require a database, and in this case, it requires a Postgres database. So I require and in this imaginary organization, the Postgres database, the only Postgres database that people have access to, lives on GCP.
Yes, so I look after the GCP team, and we offer a whole bunch of services. And with the particular services we're offering, they are only in GCP, and we're only keeping everything private. Nothing is made public. And for the purpose of this particular test application the developer wants to use, we need to open the public link between GCP and AWS. And for that, we need the security team involved. So Chris is going to help us out with that also.
So let's place the order here, and I'll jump straight back to this screen, and we should see some movement, and you'll also see some movement in controller. So in this first stages, you will just see it querying AWS to ensure that as you saw in the rule book there, it is only testing against CPU, but this can be expanded as much as you want, just for demo reasons. So if we press order now, we can see the platform team's event-driven Ansible has kicked something off. We can see on the controller, it's utilizing the platform team's automation to query the specification of the virtual machine.
And this is where your logic can expand for capacity planning or building new virtual machines or redirecting somewhere else. Sky's the limit, really, yeah.
And we can see that it's actually populated ServiceNow as well there. So the platform manager, is that you, Dan?
I believe it is you, Dan. You're running the platform and storage, aren't you?
So just a note here. So we've got looking at the requested CPU versus the CPU on the targeted machine. We can see it's done its magic and it's done its assessments. Requested CPU for the application, which was on the form. It's just an integer that I put in. Targeted VM CPU was gathered using the platform team's automation. Then essentially the platform guy can make a recommendation.
Right, so Dan, you've got something that's popped through, haven't you?
Yeah, and I'm just about to press the approve button, obviously. But again, what you'll see here is the GCP thing will then communicate onwards as such because it's the next step along the line. So the application team will say, yeah, that's cool, platform's fine, and then it'll go on to the next step, and you'll see movement in the EDA side.
So we're just going across the silos there. So the next stage, GCP.
Okay, so Dan, you've approved that. You happy for the developer to use 100%. That virtual machine? Brilliant.
And now it's moving over to you, Ken.
Now we're querying the GCP.
You're allowed to use
So what's happening now, Chris? We've got something being queried on the GCP environment. So you're having a look to see what services I got, right?
Yep. So that's just ran and that's just received. So we've got a request into service now. You should also have an update on your phone now, and essentially it's just it's essentially saying yes, we've got one database that matches your requirements. It'll give you the details of the database, and then you can say yes or no.
I would say my phone vibrated, but that was just WhatsApp.
And before you actually approve that as well, Ken, we've just got to explain that because of the workflow and because of the, I mean, this workflow can be anything that you design, but in our specific workflow, this is then going to leverage the security team's automation, the networking team's automation, just to jump through to the next step. So when you press approve, you'll see the security event-driven Ansible.
Right, yeah, so like you said, I've just gotten a message that's popped through now for the developer to use my database service in GCP. And as mentioned, it's private. They can't get to it from outside, so we need to do something once I approved. So, okay for me to approve?
Yep.
Right, so I've approved for you to use that database.
And then we can see that it's now doing some magic on inside of controller. So now it's querying the GCP security. And then it's going to pop back into service now once it's completed with just some general security details of if the ports that are open currently on GCP on that virtual machine. So you can see we've just got 22 open, which isn't sufficient to run my application. We've got a Postgres on there. So
you have that little connection parameter that's showing the Postgres is not currently open to the application.
Yep. We'll put that up. So if you are happy to continue, we will open port 5432 on the security group. Please approve this request. So this is essentially a message to the security guy, essentially saying yes. Essentially asking, can we actually open this port? Is it okay to do so? And just so you can, I'll actually try and query the database from AWS just so that you know. That we aren't doing anything in the background. This is all real, happening right now as we speak. So I've got a little script here, which is just going to try and connect to the database. As you can see, it's just hanging there. So we have no connectivity from the AWS virtual machine to the GCP Postgres.
Yep, which means the application is not going to work, right? I'm going to get the basic stuff, but none of the data is going to be retrieved.
Exactly that. So I'll act as the security guy on this one, and I'll go ahead and approve this. So simple ServiceNow approval, and you'll see the security event-driven Ansible change. So approve. There we go. You'll also see the platform event-driven Ansible kick off something because that's going to be actually publishing the virtual machine publishing the application onto the virtual machine.
So that again forwards on and leverages the rest of the platform team's automation to carry on and do the rest of the installation process. So deploy the Apache server or whatever and create the web application and expose it and do all that kind of good stuff that would happen.
Yeah. So you should see that the security has been configured. The application will be automatically installed now and will be accessible. So we can just see that this should be connecting shortly.
A couple of seconds.
There we go.
There you go.
So connection, we've got the access to the database. Few more seconds here and we should see that the application is up as well. So it's just installing the application.
So infrastructure has been taken care of basically and the application can now be deployed.
Yep.
few more seconds there, and it's also posted a message back to ServiceNow with the application being accessible.
So basically everyone in the audience can actually open that application.
Hit it and it should. Oh no, it can't.
Oh, not yet.
Live demos, eh?
Demo gods, Jesus.
Take that back, you can't open it.
What have you done, Chris? What have you done?
Live demos.
Is it the URL isn't refreshed?
Ah, there you go. And there we go.
There you go.
And it over.
So there's my 15 years ago PHP skills.
And just to prove out that the database is actually connected, we can actually see that's.
Yeah. The idea, was for you to go and tell us where to go and have dinner, but yeah.
I think we're all going to a party, so.
Possibly.
Yeah, and that's it actually. Let me jump back to, yep.
Right.
Go.
So there's a couple of key takeaways that we can take away from this demo and this idea of automating across silos. It's a slight different take on how you would have potentially done these things in the past. I mean, some of the nice things that you can do is that the automation is easily transferable and adaptable, so you can use what you've done in the past, but just expose it in a slightly different way.
And I think that ease of consummation as such is key to this. It's not, each individual team's still got that proper ownership and a proper understanding and a proper of their part of the solution, of their part of the automation. And when somebody wants to use it and leverage it, they don't have to take the playbook collection, for instance, and then build a new playbook to fit their little kind of their particular view of the world and carry on. They don't have to learn about that kind of section. They don't have to know how to use it. All they have to do is basically trigger the right API, the right EDA endpoint based on their own things. And again, this is the application teams can provide all that stuff. And again, it gives you that really, really clever way of being able to mix and match across all of the individual teams, departments, pieces that you've got. With ease. It's not. I mean,
yeah,
it just makes it so much more simple.
100%. I like the fact that everyone can retain their own automation, their own little world. So those teams that before didn't want to give you access to VMware, that's fine. You give us access to your automation in a safe way that we can use EDA, we can request it. You can still approve whether we create those virtual machines. So you have all those gates in place. You have all the security in place. Every team has control of their own domain and can still automate. We're just making their life easier, aren't we?
Totally, and it's just that real, just bringing all that kind of known knowledge, all the things they've already got, all that good automation they've been building and testing and using for however long they've been automating, into a place where they can share that and allow other people to use it in a easy but also manageable and secure manner.
Yeah,
100%.
It comes back to that first point, really. Easily consumable automation. That is that is the biggest key takeaway.
Being able to share with each other and collaborate, in the spirit of sharing and being open, it's brilliant. And on that note, us working in the services team in the UK, we do offer these kind of solutions where we can help customers do that kind of thing. So it is something that you're interested in. We have a dedicated services booth in the corner or downstairs where they talk about discovery sessions and whatnot. If you're ever interested in scheduling a discovery session with a solution, something like this for your organization's need, you can scan the QR code, come and speak to the people downstairs or speak to your account managers, product managers. That's pretty much it. So we didn't put a Q&A slide, but please feel free to ask questions if you've got any. Right.
The three EDA windows that you had open, were those under the same EDA instance, or were those unique EDA?
So they were all separate instances, yeah. So essentially, demo 3 was about giving full control per organization, per silo. And essentially ensuring that each silo has their own rules, so that you can expose your automation, but they can consume it in a safe manner via rule books.
So we're assuming that all three of these organizations have their own AAP setup.
They can actually share an AAP setup. So it's just split down the middle in regards to their organization. Because that's how you would normally set up Ansible controller. Anyway, you would just split it into separate organizations. The instances of EDA would be, in this instance, we are running it just in OpenShift as pods, but you can run them anywhere. You can run
EDA
Yeah, of course.
That's exactly that.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
We used OpenShift for the EDA instances because we hadn't made any announcement yet for AAP having the integrated EDA and how that's going to work, which I believe it's in June it's going GA, if I'm not mistaken. Don't take my word for that. Ask someone who probably knows. But yes, the idea is EDA within AAP, but there's nothing stopping you
I
from...
think this just proves a bit more, it just shows a bit more flexibility really around what solutions are available. The first demo, for instance, which was only across 2 silos, was actually using a shared EDA, and we baked both of the rule sets within that single piece, and it worked quite nicely. I think it's about that flexibility, about how you manage your rule sets and how you do that from EDA perspective. And again, I think the way we've got it there at the moment is for some teams will be right and for others will be absolutely wrong. And I think we just need to find your way.
Yeah, this was all done using the dev preview stuff as well, wasn't it?
Yeah,
So obviously there were some unknowns, especially considering we went GA, what was it, this week, in regards to event-driven Ansible?
Yeah, we not only went crazy and did live demos, we used kind of preview stuff too.
Yeah, so...
And AAP itself, can controller itself send messages into EDA?
Yeah.
Can I have, if I have a workflow from organization 1,
Yep.
and I do a bunch of stuff, and at the end of that, I say I want to send a message to the security team's workflow.
Yes.
Can't see why not.
That's exactly what I do on... so if we remember back to the platform team, that actually runs that bit of automation, and then it just and then it fires a webhook back to event-driven Ansible. So yeah, so 100%. It's actually a good way of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just listeners. So whatever your EDA is listening on or preferred method. So we've used ServiceNow to trigger things, but our first demo used messages. So if you wanted to just string messages from one team to the other team to create and then trigger off the event, you can do that too.
So it was just a webhook on that instance. So obviously you can just have a playbook that hits that webhook, just the URI module.
It's all about the different sources that you can pick and choose. So whatever's best for you.
Obviously in the real world you're probably going to use a messaging queue or something, but
Yeah, well, whatever you prefer, whatever works. But
Next. So is for ServiceNow, when you guys execute the catalog item and it creates that SC task and whereby they're written, is it just monitoring the notes field for any updates, and that's how it figures out
so
to execute the EDM?
yeah, so we aren't ServiceNow but so all ServiceNow is doing is just a curl request essentially inside of a script as soon as you press the button of order. Yeah, but there's multiple ways to do that. Yeah, there's
EDA's,
exactly.
EDA's responding to that event as such, isn't it?
Yeah.
So ServiceNow sending a curl message in, it sees that as an event, it then captures that, does something with it based on the payload, and then we move on from there. So again, we bounce stuff back to ServiceNow if we need to. Again, we're using a bit of Ansible for that.
Yeah, there's quite a few different listening types you can use. So,
but that would be yeah. I mean, there's probably somebody's probably thinking of doing that already. To be fair, yeah, there you go. Yeah,
there you go.
So, yeah, but I mean, you can because it's just a source, so you can write your own plugin for that. Yeah, that's totally doable.
any other questions? Everyone good? One more. Was that Lightspeed thing they spoke about yesterday?
Tasers, alcohol.
Lightspeed can't do rule books yet, but soon hopefully.
Yeah, that's the tricky part. You still got to get people to write automation, but I think the trick is if you can get people to see the benefits of doing it to make their life easier, and they're shooting themselves with the foot if they don't want to.
So will Lightspeed be available for rule books?
Did you know what? This is a question I asked yesterday. It should be soon. Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be too hard to implement, really. It's not as complicated as an Ansible playbook, is it? It's just a condition.
Yeah.
And you're firing it against a job template or a playbook. So I'd say soon.
Yeah, we literally asked Craig Brandt that yesterday. Did some South African to South African speak just to get an answer out of him. But yes, the Ansible was the first step. Ansible Playbooks is the first step. And then I'm sure we're going to see that on the roadmap very soon.
Yep.
I mean, it makes sense, right?
So were each of those EDAs on their own instances then?
Yep.
So
they were all in their own namespace as well, yeah. So
then OpenShift, yeah.
Can it be shared though in the car?
Yeah, it can be shared or you can give each. I would say it's probably more sensible to give each organization their own kind of rule book. so that they can give access to their automation in a safe manner.
Yeah.
I guess it would depend on, there'd be multiple ways to do it. You could have some kind of config as code approach and pipelines. 'Cause it is just code. You can just write your own rule books. And then I think you saw in the first demo where I just recreated the image and then OpenShift redeployed that. I mean, you could automate that. It would be.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of automation. Sorry, there's a little bit of integration in the. You saw in the keynote, if you saw that yesterday, where they were saying they've got some sort of particular rulebook activations and so on and so forth, which back through. Sadly, we didn't have a version to drum against, but I'm sure that's in scope and because it's logical.
You still have to apply good coding practice and peer review and everything, and get your own deployment process as you would have gone normally. It's just a different way of exposing your automation for others to use without you having to show them and give them access to your environments.
Yeah, because nobody wants to do that, really.
Yeah, exactly. It's, how many times I've not been able to help someone do an end-to-end because there was so much internal politics or access. No, I can't give you access to my VMware environment because that's not what we do. Now you can say, fine, keep your access, but give me let me have access to your automation with you approving me to build. So, again.
Do you have a core version similar to Ansible Core, like where you can execute? Well, like you can execute from the command line instead of like running a controller. Does EDA have that too?
I think that's what we actually doing.
So Ansible Rulebook is a command. Okay. Yeah. So in the container, I didn't show you the container file, but yeah, at the end, it's just Ansible runner, and then you specify the details of the rulebook, inventories, etc. And then once you run, it's not like a playbook that executes. It's a playbook that you press go and it listens and just continuously listens.
It's literally a listening service.
Yeah.
So effectively, then other people that are trying to develop code could just run against the controller, where we're calling the EDA.
Yeah. So I think they're calling it a controller again, but it's an event-driven one or something or other. Yeah. Like I said, the only challenge with that model is obviously that because it's sat there listening, it's only listening to the rules that you've loaded.
So it's restrictive. That's why.
And that's why, if you noticed earlier when Chris did the first demo, when he did Hello Ken and then Hello Dan, we rebuilt the container. Now, you could get around that and make it a bit more sensible using OpenShift, a config map, for instance, but for ease and showability on stage, we thought it was easier just to sort of quickly rebuild the container and push through.
And I think going forward with AAP, with being EDA integrated into it, you will control that via organization. So a security team will log into a security organization, put their jobs, put their templates, everything, all linked, rule books linked within that organization, so they can develop it and push it on the fly, so your standard code practices will still apply.
Cool.
Right, so if there's any other questions,
One more question. Yeah, so inventories are managed by the organization.
A couple of ways, I suppose, Chris. So yes, the organization can have the inventory, which is linked with their licensing, or what we do with some automation, you can have dynamic inventories created based on what you're doing. So if you're spinning up a new instance, you can add that into a dynamic inventory and utilize the dynamic inventory.
Yeah, so are you talking about keeping it separate, essentially? So you've got...
Say I have a service that runs on City, and then I have the server team that also automates their own stuff.
Yeah.
And so I need to tell, I finished my job, I need to tell the server team to do a thing against the server.
Yep.
So I get, how do you manage, do you just have that server in both places? Do you have some kind of linkage? Like, how do you think about that problem?
I guess it would be a dynamic inventory, like...
Yeah, you could, or the way you pass information between platforms, might have a message maybe.
Yeah, so I think at the moment you're going to have to do either dynamic or something else, aren't you? Because you can't, in AAP at the moment, share inventories between organizations as such. That's that kind of level of abstraction, isn't it? Or not abstraction, that level of separation that they have.
I guess that's my question, because I have no visibility into their inventory.
Correctly.
So how do I tell them exactly which, how do I speak in their language?
Yeah.
It's listed as something completely different on there.
100%. And if we saw what we did with the platform team, the developer okay, in this instance, we've just copied an instance name across, right? But you can have querying logic in play that can come back and say these instances match what we have available. You can use this, or we don't have that available. Let's build you a new one. Here's the name.
Yeah,
You know, here's your
some,
SSH keys and whatever.
yeah, you're going to
100%.
yeah, you're going to have to do some kind of
You can build it
query
how
to
you
be able
want.
to work out whether things are there or not and how you make that
100%.
work. Because again, I mean, you can be clever, can't you? I mean, well,
You query the inventory, I guess.
exactly. You can use tags and all that kind of stuff to query the right thing and work it out and just go from there. And again, you should be able to use a bit of automation from, again, with EDA to back to that query. So we do a query in the second one against AWS to find out, you know, whether that machine is big enough to run stuff. So there's a certain another thing of sharing that.
Yes, if that's the way you wanted to do it, yes. Yeah, you would.
Sounds fun.
Yeah.
100%,
Yeah.
yeah. You need to find what's available, and if there's nothing available, you feed back and you say, can't build it for you because there isn't anything available. You know, that happens. Sometimes we just don't have capacity, right?
Right.
Right, I think we've probably run out of time, but we'll be around if anyone's got questions.
Cheers.
Thank you all.